Hello YouTube, welcome to Curious Me channel. This is Shabazz Khan, and in this video we will learn about dependency injection. This video is continuation from our previous videos. The link to the link to those playlists is in the description down below and also here in the tabs as well. So this dependency injection is a design pattern used to mostly decouple our application. Okay, now to better understand dependency injection, we will look into the problem with the traditional approach of building our application. By traditional I mean the n-tier architecture. So here you can see at this diagram that this is a basic example of an n-tier application, okay, where UI layer depends on the controller layer, and this controller layer depends on the business logic, and then the business logic depends on the data access layer. Okay, now let's focus on business logic and data access logic. We'll write business logic and data access logic. Okay, so we'll focus on those two parts, and to do that, let's open our application and let's navigate to our home controller. Now I'll minimize this entire namespace and I'll create a new namespace and write the n-tier logic. Okay, so as you can see, we have created a new namespace and we have written a piece of code inside this. Now the reason why I chose this is to get the IntelliSense. There's basically no reason why I created a new namespace or anything. This is just for explanation and nothing else. So basically, as you can see, that this part of our code, it represents our business logic. Okay, just a snippet from our business layer, and this represents our data access logic, just a snippet from our data access layer. So let me quickly show you the diagram. In this diagram, basically the code we have written is mimicking this data access layer and this business layer. Okay, and with this in mind, let's explore that code further. Okay, now let's understand the purpose of each of these classes. So the first class, the responsibility of this class is just to fetch data from our database. Okay, the second class, which is our business layer class, the purpose of this class is to use this data access and get the data and perform some business logic and then return the data to the user. So this is the basic example of an n-tier architecture that we use, and on top of this business logic there will be one application layer and the UI layer. So the application layer will return the data to the UI layer. Okay, so let's focus on these piece of code and let's see what is the issue in this code. Now as you can see that we are defining a block data access variable class. Okay, and then in the constructor we are using this line, and this is the problem. What we are doing here is we are very tightly coupling this business logic to this data access by using this new block data access. By tight coupling I mean now this class is responsible for the lifetime of this object, and this is a bad piece of code. Okay, why this is a bad piece of code? Suppose in future if we decide to change the name of this method, get title by id name, okay, immediately you'll see that there is one error here. Now since this is a very small snippet, the error is only at one place. But imagine a real world application. This small change that you just did can affect thousands of lines of code, and you have to change each and every line. That is one issue. Second issue is, suppose now we decide to get rid of this class entirely. What I did is I said, oh no, now I am using some different database. Let me change the name of the class as well. So what I did is I decided to change the name of the class. I did it Mongo block data access. Now just see what happened. Another error popped up, and imagine this class being used throughout our application. Again, the moment you change this class, everything goes haywire. You have to change everything. Thousands of lines of code needs to be refactored. And in real life applications, this can wreak havoc because you will have no idea where the changes are and you have to visit each line. There is so much of redundant work. Now coming to the next problem. The next problem is, now if you want to write unit test cases for this class, it becomes very difficult because you are creating another object inside this class. and it becomes very difficult to mock this object. It's next to impossible, and unit testing of this class kind of becomes very cumbersome or tedious. Okay, and if you don't know what unit testing is, or you have never written a unit test, you just have to go by my word, and if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. Mocking this is very difficult. Okay, so let's summarize the problems. So here are the problems with our traditional approach. First one is tight coupling. Second one is small changes may result in huge code refactoring. And the third one is writing unit tests is very tedious. Okay, now both of this is part of tight coupling itself, but I just wanted to lay it out on the table so that people can understand what it actually means. Basically, if something is tightly coupled, it automatically means that small changes will result in huge code refactoring, and writing unit test cases is very tedious. Okay, but still I wrote it in 3 points. Anyways, so how can we solve this problem? So to solve this, we use a principle called inversion of control. Okay, and according to this principle, we should invert the flow of control as compared to traditional flow. How can we do that? How is it possible? So let's have a look at this diagram and see how we can achieve this. So in this diagram, you can see it is the same entire diagram, and now instead of controller directly depending on business layer and business layer directly depending on data access layer, there is another layer that is introduced. We call it decoupling layer. Okay, now this decoupling layer, now the controller does not depend on the business layer directly, rather it depends on the decoupling layer, and this business layer uses this decoupling layer. And similarly with this business layer depends on decoupling layer, and this data access uses this decoupling layer. And suddenly you can see that the flow of the traditional flow is now not inverted, but that we have managed to disrupt the traditional flow. Okay, now this is all about principle, and dependency injection is an implementation of inversion of control. Basically, inversion of control just gives you a plan. Okay, we can handle tight coupling using decoupling layer. It just tells you that okay, just invert the flow and you will get a nicely decoupled application, but it doesn't give you a practical way of doing it. It is just a principle. There are many ways to practically implement inversion of control, one of which is dependency injection. Okay, so now let's see how we can use this dependency injection to resolve all the issues that we have discussed above. Basically, dependency injection allows creation of objects outside of your class and provide it to a class through different ways. Okay, so that the dependency is not inside the class, it is coming from somewhere else, something like this decoupling layer. So let's jump into our code and start using dependency injection. Let me revert the changes. Okay, now let's go ahead and create our decoupling layer. And this decoupling layer is nothing but an interface. And inside that interface, so I'm creating this decoupling layer between this block business and this block data access. So the decoupling layer will be an interface for this block data access. And this interface will contain all the methods that we want in our data access class. So I'll just copy this. So our decoupling layer is completed. You don't have to call it decoupling layer. I'm just calling it because, for better understanding. So this is done. Let's implement this. Now suppose if I didn't have this method, so I'll automatically get an error and I can simply implement the interface. Okay, but I have this method, so I don't need to. So first part of our decoupling is done. We have created a data access class and we have used an interface and we have implemented from that implemented that interface in our data block access class, and we have implemented the methods inside those interface. that interface, sorry. So that is done. Now let's concentrate on the second part. In this second part, what we will do is we will remove this new block data access. The problem with our application was because of this only. So what I'll do is, instead of doing this, I'll simply pass this interface as a parameter, and I'll assign that block data access to this block data access class. Okay, now this is a class. I have to change it to block data access interface itself. Okay, so just to recap, what we have done is we have used this interface and we have passed it in the constructor of this business logic class, and inside that constructor we have assigned this interface's value to another interface, to a variable, to a similar variable. Okay, now in this method, earlier we were using new block data access, correct? Instead of that, we are using this interfaces method to return the value. As you can see, immediately you can see we have decoupled our application. You may ask how. Okay, so first what we will do is we'll change the name. Let's go ahead and change the name. And immediately you'll see I'm not getting error in my application or in my other classes, but the same class itself. It says that, bro, you have to change this. You cannot change this because you have to define this get blocks ID by get block title by ID. So you cannot change. So in doing this enforces the user to not change the method name, but rather create another one. This is one point. Now, if you decide to change the name of the class itself, let's change the name of the class itself. See, there is no error whatsoever. Okay, but this we have to do. So suppose if we change the name of this class, we have to do some changes just at one place, not every other place. And I'll tell you which place it is. But for now, just see what happened. I changed the name of the class and there is no error. Okay, now comes the most crucial part. How will this interface get the object? This is done by the dependency injection framework. It is inbuilt into many applications of frameworks like this .NET Core. It provides inbuilt dependency injection framework. Same goes with Angular. Angular also provides dependency injection framework. You can create your own dependency injection framework. It is not that simple, but you can create your own dependency injection framework. Okay, now what that dependency injection framework does is you basically write a very small piece of code to tell that dependency injection framework that whenever you find this interface, please inject an object of this class. The class which has or the class which you have said. You can set it yourself that dependency, please, whenever you find this I block data access, inject an object of X class and the class that you can provide it to. Okay, and that will get injected in the place of this interface. So let's discuss this in detail by decoupling our existing application. This was just an explanation. Let's go ahead and do some practical changes and see what is happening. Okay, so let's remove this entire thing. This was just for understanding, so let's remove it. Okay, so let's go inside our models. We have our repo, right? We have our repo. So just like we did in our example, we will create one folder. We'll write interfaces here, and inside that we'll create one interface. Now, before that, let me explain it to you. Since this blog repository, we have to create a dependency injection or decoupling layer between our models and our controllers. Okay, so I'll create an interface for this blog repository. So let's go ahead and create one interface for I blog repo. Wait. That's it. Let's use the namespace, third one, and let's copy and paste the namespace. Okay, now this interface should have all the methods that we want. from this blog repository. So I already created this method, so I'll use this method, and later on as we progress we'll keep adding methods in this interface. Okay, now let's go ahead and use this interface in our blog repository. Okay, we are doing the same things that we did in a previous example. We just implemented that interface, and automatically we have to give this method which was inside the interface, which is this one. Okay, now we use this interface in this class, and the method is already defined. That is, the first part of our dependency injection is done. Now for the second part, we'll go to our home controller, and just like we did there, we'll declare one variable. Now I think you are getting this, what is happening here, correct? So let me create a private, not read only, yeah, fine, we can create read only, iBlog repository. Let's call it blog repo. Now let me quickly import this. Okay, now instead of this new, what we will do is we will inject our one more funny thing. This is called dependency injection because you are injecting the dependency via constructor. You can also inject dependency via method or via property, but for this video we'll stick with constructor injection because it is very easy to understand and it requires less amount of coding. Now if you remember what we have to do, we can remove this new and replace this with our blog repo. That's it. That's all we have to do. Now once this is done, now from our previous video we know that this will return the second title of the second post. So the title of the second post is my second blog. So this is what it should return. Okay, so let us run this. Okay, our application is up and running. Let's open our browser. Yeah, it is opening. Now you will see my second blog, but it should not happen. Let me quickly check. Yeah, so you got an exception. Okay, why? See what the error here is. It says unable to resolve service of type my core application models interface iBlog repository. If you remember, this is similar to the error which we were getting when we removed this piece of code. Okay, and also if you remember, just a few minutes ago we were discussing about our dependency injection framework, correct? So now is the right time to discuss this in more detail. So basically I want to inject the object for this class. Right now our application does not know what should be injected here because we have not configured it. We have not told our application, hey, whenever you find this, inject this object. We haven't told it. So where can we do this? We go to startup class. Now inside our startup class, if you remember, we discussed this when we were exploring this entire startup class. I think in our startup exploration video, the link is in the description and you can check this out as well in the tab. So what we discussed is all the dependencies and all the registrations that happens for this application happens here. So basically now here I'll tell the application, whenever you find add singleton is the method that we will use, and we will tell that, hey, whenever you find this iBlog repository, okay, inject blog repository object. That's it. That's all I have to do. Now let me import the classes as well. Okay, once I have imported this, so basically with this line, I'm telling the dependency injection framework, hey, whenever you find this iBlog repository, inject this blog repository object, create this blog repository object and inject it. Hence the name dependency injection, literally. And there are three ways with using which you can do it. So one is add singleton, one is AddScoped. AddScoped, okay, blog repository, and the third one is AddTransient. There are three ways. Now each of these have a purpose. Duh. What is the purpose? Well, so this services.AddTransient, it tells semicolon. So AddTransient, it tells our application, or rather the dependency injection framework, that whenever you find this blog repository, always create a new object and inject it. Okay, so for transient, whenever this interface comes, a new object is always created and injected. That's it. When we write AddScoped, it says to the application or the dependency injection framework that whenever you find this iBlog repository, if it is the part of the same request, reuse the existing object, otherwise create a new one. Basically it means is, suppose you are doing a GET request, and if this blog repository is used 3 times in your single GET request, then this blog repository object will be reused because it is the part of a same HTTP request. Okay. If you do another post request, then a new object will be created, which will exist till that post request ends. Okay. So for each request, this object will be same and it will be different for different requests. Okay. The emphasis here is on requests. Anyways, so Singleton says that create this object and keep it always. And whenever you find this iBlog repository, keep using the existing object. That's it. That is what we are doing here. So we are using this Singleton. Now, as we move forward and as we develop as a developer, wow. So we will understand when to use Singleton, when to use scoped, and when to use transient. Okay. So don't worry about it. If you don't know what to do, do Singleton. And if you'll face an error, you know what to do then. So let's go with Singleton for now. So with this, let's rerun our application. Let me close this. Let's do .NET run. It has started. Let's open our browser. Let's refresh this. And you can see my second blog is here. Okay. So this is how dependency injection works. And this was a very quick explanation of what is dependency injection. And I hope that you understood. Otherwise, if you still have confusion, please comment and I'll try to explain this to you. Yeah, so this is the basic of dependency injection, and this is how it is done. And we are doing constructor injection, just to recap, because it is widely supported. Like .NET Core uses dependency injection via constructor, Angular also uses, so, and also it is very quick to understand and implement. So this was my argument for using constructor injection. There are other injections as well, like property. You can use properties to inject your dependencies. Similarly, you can use method to inject your dependencies. Both of those is easy to understand if you get the concept of what is dependency injection. Okay, so I try to keep it as simple as possible. And yeah, I guess that's it for this video. And in the next video, we'll discuss about controllers. So thank you guys. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.